I noticed the caregiver's eyes go straight to the filing cabinet the first time she walked into my house. Not to the family photos on the mantel. Not to the garden visible through the back window. Straight to the filing cabinet in the corner of my study. I told myself I was imagining things. I was wrong. My name is Dorothy, and I am 67 years old. I live in a white house on Clearwater Lane in Bozeman, Montana, the same house where I raised my daughter, where my husband Gerald took his last breath in the bedroom down the hall, where the elm tree in the backyard still has the rusted hook from the tire swing we hung for our granddaughter Emma the summer she turned 5. I have lived here for 31 years. I know every creak in the floorboards, every draft that comes under the back door in January, every sound this house makes at night, and I know when something feels wrong. Gerald passed 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end, which the doctor said was unusual, which I can tell you felt like 6 seconds. We had 41 years together. He was a civil engineer, careful with money, careful with everything. The house is paid off. There's a retirement account, investments he managed quietly over decades. A small rental property 2 streets over that brings in $1,200 a month. I am not a wealthy woman by any dramatic standard, but I am comfortable, and I am alone, and apparently that combination makes certain people see opportunity where they should see a human being. My daughter lives in Portland. Her name is Claire, and she visits when she can, which is 4 or 5 times a year. She worries about me. She started worrying more after Gerald died, which I understand, but she lives her own life and I live mine. I told her I was fine. I told her the same thing every Sunday when she called. I was fine. The house was fine. I was keeping busy. I was not entirely fine, if I am honest. The first winter alone was hard in a way I had not prepared for. Gerald and I used to do the crossword together every morning. Small things like that. The absence of small things is what undoes you, not the large ones. Claire is the one who suggested a part-time caregiver. Not because I need medical help, she was careful to say. Just someone to check in, help with things around the house, maybe drive me to appointments when the roads are bad. She found an agency in Bozeman, sent me the information, and I agreed mostly to ease her worry. I did not think much of it either way. The agency sent a woman named Renata. She was 43, she told me, originally from outside Cleveland, moved to Montana 8 years ago. She had a soft voice and a quick smile, and she remembered everything I told her. The second week she came, she brought a lemon cake, because I had mentioned once, in passing, that lemon was my favorite. I thought that was a very kind thing to do. I told Claire about it on Sunday. Claire said she sounded lovely. Renata came 3 times a week. She helped me sort through some of Gerald's things I had not been able to face. She drove me to my cardiologist appointment in November, when there was ice on the road. She sat in the waiting room the whole 2 hours and had hot tea ready in a thermos when I came out. She was good company. She listened more than she talked, which I have always found to be the rarest quality in a person. The questions started around the 2nd month, gradual enough that I did not notice the pattern at first. She asked once how long I had lived in the house. Normal question. I answered it. She asked another time whether the rental property was a hassle to manage, said she had always been curious about investment properties. I said Gerald had set it all up and I mostly just deposited the checks. She asked whether I had a property manager or handled it myself. I said myself mostly, with help from my accountant. She nodded and moved on. Then she started asking about my health. Not in an alarming way. More like concern. She would say things like, "You seem a little tired today, Dorothy. Are you sleeping all right?" Or she would watch me get up from the chair and say, "Is your balance feeling steady?" My last client had some issues with that. She recommended a supplement. She recommended I ask my doctor about a certain medication she said helped with cognitive clarity in older adults. She said she worried sometimes about people who lived alone, how they could make financial decisions that didn't serve them well without meaning to. I remember sitting with my coffee after she left one evening, turning that last comment over in my mind. It had been so gently said, so wrapped in warmth. And yet something about it stayed with me like a splinter, small and invisible and persistently uncomfortable. I did not say anything. I filed it away. It was my neighbor Helen who first said it out loud. Helen is 72, retired school teacher, sharp as anyone I have ever met and completely unafraid of saying what she thinks. She had met Renata twice in passing when she came over for our regular Thursday dinner. One Thursday in December, maybe 3 months in, she set down her fork and said, "Dorothy, I want to say something and I need you to hear me out before you react." I said, "All right," she said. "I don't like that woman." I asked her why. She said, "Because she looks at your house the way my ex-husband looked at his poker winnings, like she's already spending it." I defended Renata. I said Helen was being uncharitable. I said Renata had been nothing but kind to me and brought me a lemon cake and sat in a waiting room for 2 hours. Helen listened to all of it and then said, "I'm sure she did. Investments often look like gifts in the beginning." I went home and thought about that for a long time. I started paying attention differently after that. Not obviously. I did not change my behavior at all. I just started watching, and once you start watching, things you dismissed as random reveal themselves as deliberate. Renata asked me once whether I had a will. She framed it as concern, said she had a client whose family ended up in a terrible situation because things hadn't been put in order. Said she hoped I had someone helping me with that kind of planning. I said yes, I had an attorney. She asked who. I said a firm in Bozeman I had worked with for years. She said she had heard of a financial planner who specialized in working with widows, said he had helped several of her clients get their affairs properly arranged. She offered to give me his card. I took the card. I did not call the number on it. Instead, I called my attorney. His name is Robert. He has handled my family's legal matters for over 20 years. And when I told him what had been happening, the questions, the comments about cognitive decline, the referral to an outside financial planner, I heard him go quiet on the other end of the line. That particular silence, from a careful man like Robert, told me more than words would have. He said, "Dorothy, what I want you to do is nothing. Don't change your routine. Don't let on that anything has changed. And I need you to start keeping a record." I asked him what he thought was happening. He was quiet for another moment. Then he said, "In my experience, when a caregiver begins asking a client questions about estate planning and referring them to outside financial professionals, it can sometimes be part of a pattern. The goal is usually to establish over time that the client has diminished capacity and to position someone the caregiver is connected to, a financial advisor, an attorney, sometimes the caregiver herself, to take on control of assets. It's slow, it's patient, and it often works because the person being targeted trusts the caregiver completely by the time it becomes visible." I sat in Gerald's old chair and I looked at the filing cabinet across the room. The filing cabinet Renata's eyes had gone to on her very first day. "How long has this been happening?" Robert asked. I said about 3 months. He said, "All right, let's start now." I kept a small notebook from that point forward. Date, time, what was said, exact words when I could remember them. I wrote it all down the same evening while my memory was fresh. I have always had a strong memory. That detail would become important later. Renata continued her visits. I continued being warm, open, everything she expected of me. Inside, I was watching everything. In January, she mentioned the financial planner again. She said one of her other clients had just updated her estate documents with his help and felt so much more at peace. She said, wouldn't it be nice to have that peace? She said she worried about what would happen to me if something came up unexpectedly, living alone the way I did. I said it was a good thought and I would consider it. That same week, I mentioned to Renata that I had been having some memory trouble. I said I had lost my keys twice. I said I had missed a dentist appointment. None of this was true, but I said it naturally, with the slight, embarrassed laugh of someone admitting a small failing. I watched her face when I said it. The attention sharpened, almost imperceptibly, but it was there. She started suggesting things. Maybe I should let her hold on to a spare house key for safety. Maybe I should have someone she trusted to check in when she wasn't there. Maybe I should think about having someone with power of attorney, just in case, just for peace of mind. She mentioned her cousin, casually, said he was a notary, said he had helped several of her clients get that kind of thing arranged without the expense of a formal attorney. I wrote every word down that night. The following week, I called the financial planner whose card she had given me. I did not use my own name. I said I was a neighbor of one of his clients and was calling to ask some general questions. Within 2 minutes, he had asked about the value of my home, whether I owned it outright, and whether I had existing investment accounts. When I mentioned I was a widow, with no children nearby, his interest became markedly warmer. I thanked him and hung up. I called Robert immediately. Robert had already been doing some digging of his own. He had found a complaint filed with the state licensing board against Renata's agency 2 years old, involving a client in Missoula who alleged that a caregiver had facilitated an unauthorized change to her power of attorney. The complaint had been settled quietly. The caregiver named in the complaint was not Renata, but the financial planner she had referred me to had been mentioned in the case documents. There it was, patient, slow, and it had worked before. Robert said we needed to involve Adult Protective Services and possibly the county sheriff's office. He said we needed to do it carefully and we needed documentation, which I had been building for 2 months. He said I should not confront Renata directly and I should not tip my hand. I said I understood. Then he said something I have thought about many times since. He said, "Dorothy, I want you to know that most people, when they're being treated with this level of gentleness and apparent care, don't catch it. The fact that you did and that you kept records is going to make all the difference." I did not feel proud. I felt tired and sad in a way that is hard to explain, because Renata had also genuinely made me laugh sometimes. She had been real company in a quiet house, and the grief of discovering that warmth was a tool is its own particular kind of loss. Claire came home in February. I had not told her everything on the phone. I had kept the Sunday calls normal, not wanting her to panic from 1,200 miles away before we were ready. But when she walked in the door and I sat her down at the kitchen table and told her everything, from the filing cabinet on day 1 to the notebook in my nightstand drawer, I watched my daughter's face move through disbelief and then anger, and then something that looked almost like guilt. She said, "Mom, I'm the one who found that agency." I said, "I know." She said, "I thought I was helping you." I said, "I know that too." We held hands across the table for a little while without saying anything. The following Thursday, Renata came for her usual visit. She did not know that Robert was parked down the street. She did not know that a detective from the sheriff's office was in the car behind him. She did not know that Claire was in the back bedroom with the door slightly open. Renata came in, hung up her coat, made us both tea, and sat down at the kitchen table the way she always did. She asked how I was sleeping. She asked about my memory, whether the issue with forgetting things had happened again. I said yes, actually, several times. She nodded with practiced concern. Then she set a folder on the table. She said a friend of hers had put together some paperwork she thought might help me. She said it was a durable power of attorney document, just a starting point. Nothing had to be signed today. She said she just wanted me to have it, to look it over, and that her cousin the notary could come by any time I was ready. I looked at the folder. I looked at her face, which was open and warm and completely composed. I said, "Renata, can I ask you something?" She said, "Of course." I said, "The complaint in Missoula, the client whose power of attorney was changed without her knowing. Were you involved in that one, or did you come on board afterward?" The warmth didn't leave her face all at once. It left in degrees, like heat going out of a room. She was still for a long moment. Then she started to say something about not knowing what I was referring to. That was when Claire came out of the back bedroom. That was when Robert knocked on the front door. That was when I stood up and opened it for him, and he walked in with the detective behind him, and I sat back down at my own kitchen table and let the people I trusted handle what came next. Renata was escorted out. There would be a longer investigation, Robert explained to Claire and me that evening, sitting where Renata had sat an hour before. The financial planner was already being looked at in connection with the Missoula case. What I had documented over 2 months, every date, every exact word, every referral and suggestion, gave investigators a detailed record of a pattern that had been very difficult to prove before now. Claire stayed for 2 weeks. We did the crossword together every morning, which I had not done with anyone since Gerald. She's not as good at it as he was, but neither am I anymore, so we manage. The elm tree in the backyard is budding early this year. Emma, my granddaughter, is coming to visit in April, and I have already ordered a new rope for the tire swing. The house is the same house it always was. The filing cabinet is still in the corner of the study. It is not moved, but I look at it differently now. Not with fear, with something closer to resolution. Everything in that cabinet, the deed, the account statements, the investment records Gerald built so carefully over 40 years, it is all still there. Still mine. Not because I was lucky, because I paid attention and I wrote it down and I did not let warmth make me incurious. That is the only thing I would tell anyone else in my position. The warmth is real, sometimes. The kindness can be genuine, but your instincts are also real. And the moment something settles under your skin like a splinter, small and nagging, too easy to dismiss, that is the moment to start paying attention. That is the moment to trust yourself. Even when someone is offering you lemon cake, I know what the filing cabinet sounds like when the drawer opens. I know every creak in this house. I know when something is wrong. People ask me sometimes what the hardest part was. They expect me to say it was the fear or the anger or the moment I realized what Renata had been doing all those months. But the hardest part was simpler than any of that. The hardest part was sitting across the kitchen table from someone who had made me laugh, who had driven me to my appointments, who had remembered that lemon was my favorite, and understanding that all of it had been a means to an end. That grief doesn't have a clean name. It's not betrayal exactly, because betrayal implies you were close, and the closeness itself was the fabrication. It's more like finding out a room you loved was only ever a stage set. The warmth was real to you. The warmth was never real to you. The warmth was never real to them. I thought a lot about why it worked as long as it did, and the honest answer is that I wanted it to work. Gerald had been gone 2 years. The house was quiet in a way I hadn't fully adjusted to. When someone shows up and listens well and remembers the small things, you want to believe that's genuine. Loneliness makes you generous with your trust in ways that a fuller life might not. That's not a weakness. That's just being human, but it is something worth knowing about yourself, because the people who do what Renata did, they know it too. They count on it. What stocked it was not luck. I want to be clear about that, because I think people sometimes hear a story like this and file it under, she was fortunate, and move on. I was not fortunate. I was paying attention. Helen said something uncomfortable at dinner, and instead of dismissing it to protect my comfort, I let it sit with me. I started watching. I started writing things down. Those were choices, not coincidences. There is something I have come to believe about the way our choices accumulate over time. Gerald spent 40 years making careful, quiet decisions, building something solid without fanfare or display. He did not talk about money. He just managed it with integrity, day after day. What he left behind was not just financial security. It was a model for how to move through the world with your eyes open. I think about him every time I look at that filing cabinet. He taught me, without ever using the words, that vigilance and care are not opposites of warmth. You can be warm and still be clear-eyed. You can be kind and still notice when something is wrong. Claire blamed herself for finding the agency. I understood that, but I also told her that the failure was not hers. She was trying to take care of me. The people who built that system were counting on daughters like Claire, on families doing their best from a distance, on the gap between good intentions and daily reality. That is where they operated. What I would tell anyone in my position is this: your instincts are not paranoia. That small, persistent discomfort, The thing that feels too minor to mention, too easily explained away, that is worth examining. Write it down. Call the person you trust most. Let someone else look at what you're seeing. The documentation I kept over those 2 months was not dramatic. It was just a small notebook and a pen, and the discipline to use them consistently. It made all the difference. The elm tree is budding. Emma is coming in April. The house is the same house it always was, and I am still the person Gerald knew. I did not let them take that. That part was the whole point.